Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Elevate Your Running podcast. My name is Sarah, your host today. I'm excited to have this conversation just like every or any other week. We're on episode 131. I'm going to cover 5 specific needle movers that you can add to your training to elevate your running performance. And these are 5 things. Some I've talked about before, some I haven't talked about before. And I love these because if you've been listening for a while, you know that the needle movers are kind of those one percenters. And we're going to peel a layer back. This is not going to be the hydration, the nutrition conversation today. We're going to look at 5 key things that you can do that you're probably not doing to elevate your running performance. And it's going to mean that it takes time, right? And that's one of the biggest things when it comes to running and training is how much time do you have to train? How much time do you have to get the miles in, right? First and foremost, have the proper warm-ups, have the proper cool downs, get the strength training done, fuel well, hydrate well, get all your sleep. Like it is wild how much time it actually takes to train what I would call like properly for a race. Now, can you train just based off of running miles? Of course you can. Are you probably going to go through some ebbs and flows, maybe hit some detours along the way because you're showing up with niggles, you're not staying healthy, maybe you're a bit burnt out? Of course, I think that's pretty natural if you're focusing on just running and trying to get to a start line, happy, healthy, confident, or ready to go. So these are going to be some really cool aspects to add in to your training. But before we begin, I want to start with some elevated moments. Heather shared on Instagram that her elevated moment was crushing some 200 repeats a few weeks after having a not so great workout of 200s, which I was Heather's coach at practice. I wouldn't necessarily say her first workout wasn't great, but she showed up much stronger the second week. And I think that's very, very typical for 200s. Like sometimes that turnover, that speed just isn't there. It's just not there. And especially in the summer months, we're training at night too. Like there's just so many different factors. Hello, stress. Hello, heat. Hello, summer weather, right? And it's been windy on our track on Wednesday night. So that can also play a factor into it, especially with 200s. If you are running 200s on the track, you really want to make sure that you're running, and it's windy, that you really want to make sure that you're running with the wind at your back and not running into the wind. So she closed out her elevated moment by saying that she didn't let her previous workout influence her mindset and instead went in with a confident, ready to get after it and get uncomfortable attitude, which I love. And I think that's such a big lesson that we should all lean into a little bit more this summer. Is if you are getting a repeated workout, it could be for a variety of different reasons, and to not let maybe a poor performance or a really tough day influence how you're going to show up today, because each day is different. Each day is new, each day is unique, and we get to go after it with a new drive and like the same amount of confidence that we would if we had maybe crushed that first workout. I think that's the key to some good success there. Sarah H says, my elevated moment was the support of the Wednesday night team and her coach, which is me, believing in my potential as I continue to explore what I'm capable of on the track, elevated in gratitude and thanks to have found this community of runners. So great. So both Sarah and Heather are running Chicago Marathon, and Sarah hasn't run workouts before. And she's run Boston. She's run other marathons. So we're easing into workouts. I think they're so much opportunity when runners come to me and they say, oh, I have run races. I just have never strung together workouts, or I haven't done track workouts before. I've only really relied on tempo. And there's so much goodness there as a coach that I just like love to take on and to see what we can create. So we're 13 weeks out from Chicago as I record this episode. So Sarah has a lot of potential, as does Heather, to run, get closer to their potential at Chicago in October. My elevated moment of the week goes back to community as well. I have really had this ebb and flow of how I show up as a human, as a coach to group runs. It's been something that um, some seasons I'm really into and other seasons I'm not. And I think a lot of it depends on my schedule, my own personal training. And there were definitely some moments of growth last week as I took a step back. I had a down week in running, and it allowed me the opportunity to say yes to a lot of group runs. So I actually went to 4 group runs last week, which is very like typical of me. I either do nothing or I'm like 110% all in. So I went to 4 group runs last week. And it was a lot of energy. It was a lot of time. Group runs for me could take, I would say, 2 to 2.5 times the amount of just time it would take if I were to just go and run a normal like 5-mile run by myself. But it does have a lot of benefits to it. It does provide a lot of energy to me. It was a lot of fun. I got to connect with not only people that I coach, but I got to connect with a lot of new runners. I got to make a lot of connections, and I got to see friends that I haven't seen in a while. And I got to support some incredible organizations like Boulderthon, which is a race here in Boulder in September. So it was really great to connect with Phil, who is the founder of Boulderthon, and connect with his wife and just all the partners surrounding that race. And then I also got to go to the ASICS run on Tuesday night, and Megan Featherston was there, and it was great to connect with her and just to like normalize me, because I do like when people reach out, there's always this very nice energy surrounding people who reach out, and how they view me and how they see me, and it's very nice. It's like a really surreal sort of thing for me. And so I went into A6 run, and I thought I had this huge like imposter syndrome going on. Now, Megan was on the podcast last summer. We did, a video podcast. She also coaches, a nutrition coach, registered dietitian, sports dietitian, to an Elevate athlete. So we have that connection. And I immediately went into that mindset of like, she's not going to know who I am. I'm going to have to introduce myself. And like, I really hope this isn't awkward. I hope I don't make this awkward. And literally, I'm standing on the side, kind of waiting because there's like a line of people to talk to her. And she like looks beyond the line and makes eye contact with me. And she's like, Sarah, I recognized you as soon as I saw your face. And it was really, really fun and special. And thanks, Megan, for making me feel included. And it's just so funny how we all show up in life, and how we think certain things, and we have imposter syndrome, and we have doubts, and we have fears, and we have anxiety. And yet at the end of the day, we're all human. We all go through that. And, a lot of the time it's in our heads, right? So great week last week. I'm coming off of 4 group runs. My heart is certainly very, very full from all of them. I also got to partner with CIM and the CIM ambassador to host a run to kick off their training for CIM, which I think they're now 19 weeks out from race day. And just really incredible opportunities to meet new people, expand the running community, all that good stuff. This is recorded. I'm recording this on a Monday. I am pretty tired this morning, or today for sure. I'm definitely feeling all of the energy given last week, and but also know it's going to be a great week. So let's get into it. So I have 5 different things that are what I would consider needle movers that I'm going to guarantee most of us are not doing. Now, this first one is something I talk about a lot. And then the other four are going to be a little bit more on the newer side, or maybe a chance to really lean into it, because I may or may not have mentioned some of these before, but sometimes we get to hear things over and over and over again, right? Before it actually lands and it sinks in. And a lot of times I think it's like where we are in our training, where we are in life to hear these things. Are we ready to hear about the things that we need to do to kind of move the needle for an elevated fall performance? Or are we still, or are we in this place of saying, I'm not quite there yet, but maybe I will be next cycle, or maybe I will be in a few cycles, right? That's what I love about these podcast episodes, is that even if it's not in that stage that you are currently in, if you listen through it, I mean, there could be a nugget that lands for sure, but then also it could be something where you have this aha moment later on as you're tackling that next training cycle, or maybe it's in a full year. Um, and you think, yes, now is the time where I can really lean into some of those other things. Now that I've really tackled what I've wanted to tackle in this like foundational piece of running. So let's get into it. First things first, mobility. I am such a big believer in mobility. And this is probably, I mean, is this topic, is this process goal coming up every single week these days? Probably, because I'm a big believer in it. I know I talked to the Elevate team last week. We had a team call on Thursday, and it was a really fun call. I got to talk really fast on that call because I needed to go to the Boulderthon group run, and got to go to the Boulderthon group run, but we talked about mobility. And as I was preparing this week's episode, I thought about it in terms of the invisible string between running and training. And I love this. If you're a Taylor Swift fan, you maybe have caught that reference, but when you're running, and maybe even as like a newer runner, you are solely focused on being consistent, getting in the training run, and probably still trying to figure out this whole 3 out of 10 RPE. What exactly is easy running and what exactly is recovery running? And how do I even know if I'm doing this right? Right. So there's that side of it. And then you go into training and, or a more focused running. And that could be in a sense of you're going after a bigger goal. You have now figured out kind of that aerobic zone 2 running. You have figured out your consistency. You have your habits kind of dialed in. You have your schedule dialed in. That alarm clock goes off in the morning and you're getting up to run. That sort of aspect is like check mark. You know, you've figured that piece out. Now, what do I want to add to it? Mobility is such a great place to be. It is the needle mover. I think it's the biggest needle mover that goes unnoticed. I really leaned into a lot more mobility last year. I think it was around like the spring, early summer, because that year, last year, I was running and training for the Boston Marathon. So my training schedule looked quite a bit different than let's just train for a fast, flat marathon. A little bit different. A lot of hills, a lot of intensity. It was the spring of wind in Colorado. And every run for about 5 weeks had an intense headwind. And so there was a lot of effort going into long runs, which is not necessarily a great thing, especially for someone who really wanted to hit pace and not rely so much on effort in the wind. So there's that side of things. And then going into a summer of speed, I was still maintaining pretty high mileage, but my intensity skyrocketed. So I needed to figure out a way to recover better. And I needed to figure it out fast because summer running last summer was really tough for me and I was feeling all of it. So I like to think of mobility as like the TLC of running, is that it's all the goodness that you want to feel in your body. So I think it's really important to know that 1, it works. 2, it's something that anyone can do. And 3, it only can take 5 to 10 minutes if that's what you want it to be. Last week on the team call, I shared kind of some insights on my mobility because Nell will give me on Mondays, which are typically a rest day, not this week, but I'll have a Monday, like every other Monday is my rest day. And I'll have like a 30 to 35-minute mobility session optional. Like if I want to do it, she never checks up on that or checks in on that, right? It's just something on my Training Peaks. Like if I do it, I do it. And I love to do it because I feel so much better. And as a master's athlete, as an athlete who is running higher mileage, as an athlete who wants to continue to grow and to improve in this space, mobility for me is going to be a big needle mover. And I know it's going to be a needle mover for you. So, like I said, it can be a short session of like 3x10 reps of glute bridges, clamshells, monster walks, done and done. How fast can you get through it with good like form, right? But if you're trying to convince yourself to do it, one, I think it's great to have a schedule, make it a habit. Um, Sometimes I flow out of this habit for sure with mobility. I am not perfect with anything that I do. Like the mobility will ebb and flow. I've been in a better season of getting mobility in, which is also interesting because I've also been in a better season of running over the last 6 weeks. So it's kind of interesting how that can go hand in hand. So, what does mobility create? So I think all of these points are good reminders to remind yourself of why you're doing the mobility work. These are things that I continuously remind myself when I'm like, wow, I have a lot of work to do. I'm just going to do that rather than walk to the gym, do mobility, come back. I mean, it can be as long as I want it to be, right? Um, so these are all the great things that mobility creates. Think about an improved range of motion. Hello, that's a huge needle mover. You're going to show up stronger and faster to workouts. You're going to feel better on your long runs. You're going to feel better on your easy and recovery days. You're just going to have an improved range of motion. You're going to have better flexibility. Also, great for all of the above I just mentioned. It's going to improve your running form, which is not something, unless something is like drastically wrong, not something we want to change, but something we can change if we want to. And like we get to change if we really want to focus in on it. It's very similar. I describe it as like a golf swing. Like everyone has a different golf swing, right? Like if you look at the pros, you could even look at like the elite runners. Like everyone has a different form, right? But it works for them. As long as you're staying healthy, it works for you. But it can improve your running form. And when your running form improves, congratulations, you are running more efficiently. And that is going to translate into a faster time on race day. And especially when we are running those endurance races like a 13.1, a 26.2, I'm a big believer in like, wow, if we can just dial in one small thing and improve your running form or improve your range of motion, you will be able to take off some time on that race distance because of how many steps you're taking over the course of those two races. What is it? It's about like 40 to 42,000 steps, at least for me in a marathon. And then maybe a little bit over. I know when I ran Chicago, I had over 50,000 steps that day, but that was its own thing. And then the half would be like around 20, maybe 20,000. So when you are repetitive with that motion, the more efficient you are, the faster you're going to be, the better you feel. I mean, it all kind of translates, right? You're going to avoid overstriding, which is going to leave you with, an improved kind of stride. And you're going to be able to run a little bit more efficient. You're going to be able to run faster. You're also going to avoid injuries. Overstriding can lead to injuries. And one thing we know to be true is that the more consistent you can be as an athlete and as a runner, the more you get to stack those training cycles. And the more you can stack training cycles, just the stronger you get, as long as you're taking that rest and recovery that we all get to take as well. You're going to reduce muscle soreness. Now, this is what I notice more of after hard workouts and after long runs. So after my Wednesday workout, I have a gym like strength session that Nell gives all her athletes. It's kind of like this general like strength for marathoners routine, but it's awesome. And I will always start out with mobility before I even go into that strength. So I'll run my workout, I'll get in the car. I'm not perfect. I don't stretch after I don't stretch after running. I get in the car, go home, I'll eat something, head to the gym, and then do mobility and then get into my strength. And then I can shut things down and kind of get ready for my day before the awesome chaos that is my Wednesday. But it does reduce muscle soreness. So this is huge. If you can reduce your muscle soreness from those track workouts, from those tempo efforts, from those long runs, you're going to be able to recover faster in your next run, which is going to lead you to recover faster for that second run 2 days out from a workout, which is going to lead you into your next workout feeling better. And this is the biggest piece to this puzzle I think I've noticed from mobility sets is how good I feel going into the next workout. And I have a workout on Wednesdays. I have a workout on Saturdays right now. And then I have a long run on Sunday. That is a very unique schedule. It's not a schedule I recommend for most runners. You really have to have a lot of experience and a lot of mileage and a lot of healthy training cycles stacked to be able to do something like that because it is pretty intense and it's not fun. I think the mental strength too has to be pretty strong because sometimes that Sunday long run is a slog from like the first step to the last step. It's just very tough to get through. So it is something that is for a certain type of runner and it's not for every season either. It's not something that I do when I'm training for a marathon. It is something that I seem to do outside of marathon training though. So it is showing up quite a bit throughout my year. But I'm able to do it. The mobility has been a game changer for me to be able to do that. The second piece to mobility that I think has really helped me is that it creates a better range of hip extension, which is going to lead to a stronger stride. So this summer, I have been on the track running. I've been running a 200-meter PR, a 400-meter tied PR, and I've just been running really strong. And Nell's feedback to me when she's at practice is that my stride, my hip extension is just so much more dialed in on where she wants to see it. And that my stride is, her words, not mine, like one of the most beautiful things she's ever seen when I'm out there. And it's just something that when you can have that really strong hip extension, you're able to do more. I have now reduced muscle soreness. I have a better range of my hip extension. My stride is stronger. And now I'm starting to run faster, right? It all ties together. It's all a domino effect, which is so cool with mobility. It's kind of that, it's the invisible string that I think a lot of us are missing. It also reduces the muscle tightness. So that muscle soreness, the muscle tightness, the imbalances that we have with running. And then ultimately, it just helps us move faster. And I think at the end of the day, I think that's what we all want, especially if we're training. We want to be able to move faster and have it feel good in the process, right? I don't I don't think anyone would argue that point. I think we can be in different seasons to say we might not be in that season of wanting to move faster, but if we are in that season of training, we want to be able to move more efficient, to be able to run faster. And I think too, it's important to know that like mobility can help with our flexibility, and that's going to help us stay healthy and reduce the risk of injury, which is super, super important. Um, Now, you might be asking yourself, well, Coach Sarah, how can I fit this into my schedule? I'm a busy parent. I'm already training what seems like so many miles a week. I'm supposed to eat well. I'm supposed to hydrate. I'm supposed to do strength training. How am I supposed to fix or like find time to put this in my schedule? So I hear you. I see you. I know it's really tough. Like I said earlier, there are seasons where I am terrible at it. And it's usually when things are very, very busy on Elevate side, where I'll make not even excuses. My priorities are different. Um, but I think here are some solutions that you can quickly shift in your schedule to make this happen. Again, 5-10 minutes, start out with basic moves. Like I mentioned, the glute bridges, the clamshells, the monster walks, those are awesome. They are essential and they help. Leg overs are great, hip circles. Those are two other of my favorite moves. Cat cows are also great to kind of help open the back. Those are all great, and you can do them very quickly. You can do them throughout the day. It doesn't have to be one chunk of time. These could be throughout the day. I think it's also important that if you are really struggling with getting in some of these other pieces to training, then maybe you take a look at your training schedule and take a look at how many miles you're running a week or how many minutes you're running a week, and ask yourself or ask your coach if you're working with one, like, could we maybe reduce this by 1 or 2 miles to get 10 to 20 minutes back on my schedule to then execute these things, because it is really important. If you do that, it's then up to you to take that extra time that you're getting back and translating it to that area of mobility and really making sure that that time is really focused in on what you say you're going to do, right? You could also find time to do this with maybe a run friend at the end of a run, with your spouse, significant other. You could do this at the very end of the night if you're watching like a TV show or if you're listening to a book or a podcast. You could do this with your run club, the Elevate group on Wednesday nights to 7-way hips together. And it's a great way to end practice. We do some hip strengthening. It does get in a little bit of that mobility work as well. And then, I've had feedback from athletes. We only do it in the summer because of how cold it is outside in the winter. And, there could be snow or ice on the ground, but really I've had feedback of how good that feels when people are like, yes, I got my workout in with my coach. We got in some stretching, we got in some mobility, and now I can go home, check the box. Every single thing is done. So when I go home, I don't have to worry about anything else except eat, shower, and go to bed, right? Like that's a great feeling to have. And I want to note that Dynamic Runner is an app that Elevate has partnered with, and it's something that I'm a big believer in, of like the mobility, the strength training, the stretching has its piece. I'm not going to say I do it because I don't, and people who run with me know I don't. So I'm not going to say I do, but those are all pieces of that app. And so if you're struggling with being consistent and getting it in, maybe download the app. I think they have like a monthly rate. It's a few dollars a month. You can go in and choose beginner, intermediate, advanced. And then you can choose mobility, stretching, strength training. I think they have a few other categories in there. There is a discount code if you're looking to save a few dollars too a month. And you can find that in the show notes for this episode and for the past few episodes. So the second thing is creating a solution for one thing that isn't working in your training. So you could view this as a process goal, but you could also look at this as like a mid-season check-in, right? For us going into, Berlin is in September. We have Chicago 13 weeks away, which means Berlin is 11 weeks away. We have Marine Corps, which would be 15 weeks away. We have New York at 16. Indianapolis is 17 weeks away. Like you're starting to train, right? You're starting to get back into that habit. You're starting to get back into things. Take a look to see, like, maybe one, you don't know what needs work on. So take a few weeks to figure it out, but then take a step back and ask yourself what's working, and then congratulate yourself and celebrate that, because that's really cool and it should be celebrated. And then take a look at what's not working. Or if you have a coach, you could lean into them a little bit to see maybe it's a blind spot that you're not aware of that's not working, and then make that list. Just notice what can you do better. Really try to not judge yourself for it, because as humans, as runners, we're always going to have two sides to that list for sure. There's always going to be things that work. There's always going to be things that don't work. And just evaluate on that list of what's not working. What is the one thing that seems like either the easiest thing to fix or the thing that's going to provide the most growth to you over this training cycle? And then pick that, just that one thing. With training and with running, it can be extremely easy. You throw on a pair of trainers, you start your run. There's no watch. There's no nothing. You just go out there and do it like in the olden days, right? And then there's the complete opposite spectrum of it. And I know I fuel that other side of the spectrum quite a bit because I am such a big believer in all the things to help us be a a stronger, more confident runner, right? And it can be overwhelming at the same time. I'm lucky enough to have a schedule that allows me to be a bit more flexible with being able to do a lot of things that I definitely don't think I would have the time to do if I was still working in the same industry that I was in before I became a coach. I just know I wouldn't be able to do it all. So if you're in that season, it can feel really overwhelming. So maybe it's picking the easiest thing on that list and going after it. And if you're in kind of that training where you're like, no, I really want to make the most growth because I'm going after a BQ, or I'm going after a breakthrough time, or I'm going after something like X, whatever that is, go after it. Make a plan. Go after it. And that's going to be such a huge piece in how you elevate your fall performance. The third step is visualization. So I've talked about this before, and I think it's a great piece to the training puzzle. I just got off before I started this recording. I had week 6 of the Coaches Collective with Dr. Laura Pence. She's amazing. I love her energy so much. It's like everything I need in my life. And we talked today about the anxious athlete, and she always talks about a good coach does this and a great coach does this. And one of the things that she talked about with being a great coach is going through and talking through that process of visualization with an athlete and with a runner, because it creates so many good things from it if they do it, right? And she gives examples, and I think it's a really cool place to be of when you're with the athlete in person, on my Wednesday nights, I can talk to athletes in person and look them in the eyes and say let's visualize this rep. Let's visualize running this pace at Chicago. Let's visualize running down the stretch of Michigan Ave and seeing that last right turn before the little hill, and then before the left turn, and then the finish line's right there. So that last right turn is a big deal because you're going to be able to see it. And it's something where if you start practicing it now, on race day, you're probably going to get goosebumps when that is in real life for you, right? So visualization is such a big piece for how you can show up on race day. But it is something that gets to be practiced. It is something that I'm a big believer in that gets to be practiced at the very beginning of the training cycle. I am 17 weeks out from my race. Now you might know what race I'm running. And I have already started to visualize a time. I have visualized the feeling. I have visualized the paces. I have visualized, I think, every single piece to my marathon that I can already visualize. And I've already shared some of that with one of my teammates of where I think I'm going to be on the course at 26.2, because it is going to be a course that has long tangents. I'm already planning for that. I know I'm going to be running 26.5, 26.2 I hope nothing past 26.2. So I know like if I'm going after a certain goal, what that pace progression has to look like in order to do it, and where 26 miles on my watch comes in at, what time I want to see, and the time I want to see at 26.2, and how I'm going to have a kick and visualize a 400-meter, 400-meter kick down the lane. Like I've visualized it. I've visualized all of it. I think about it on my runs all the time. So if you see me running and I'm not paying attention, it's probably because I'm thinking about my race, which happens a lot. But it's such a big needle mover. I started doing this for the Chicago Marathon, which I was training for 2 years ago. And I didn't realize I was actually doing it at the time. No one had really talked to me about it before. And I had already I'd visited Chicago as a kid. I was really excited to go back to Chicago. I was seeing it as my hometown race. My parents were coming. I was having one of my great friends, Jesse. I had Elevate athletes coming into town just to cheer me on, which was exciting. I had a ton of people that I knew running it. Like it was just going to be like such a party. And it was a party for sure. And I didn't realize it, but like on race morning, when they were kind of like playing like the kickoff song, which is a really fun song, and just like gearing everyone up, getting everyone gearing to go, like I started to like have tears in my eyes because I was like, oh my gosh, this is everything that I've been thinking about. And my warm up felt really good. My strides felt like smooth, like this is going to be a great day. And I just leaned all into that positive visualization. So it gets to happen now, everyone. Um, Journal what you want to run. Take some time, figure out what you want to run. Running Explained posted today about like not just randomly throwing out this random run goal. Like, let's be strategic. What can you run? What is realistic? If you're working with a coach, what's great about that is that that goal can shift, especially if you're someone who hasn't worked with a coach, if you haven't run workouts. Those are usually the athletes where I see the biggest improvement over one training cycle, where I'm shifting that race pace like every few weeks because they're just creating a ton of fitness week over week over week, which is super exciting to be at. But take some time, journal what you want to run, the time, right? That outcome goal, how you want to feel, how you want to get there, what that's going to look like. Actually visualize the course. So what's really cool about most races now is that someone, if it hasn't been the race director, it's been someone who has run the race, has put out like a video of the course on YouTube. So, especially for my Boston crew, I send them like a documentary to watch. I send them a YouTube video to start visualizing. I remember 2 years ago, one athlete was like 2 days before the race, or I think it was like 2 days. And he's like, oh, I haven't watched the video. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, well, it's a little too late. Like this needed to start 12, 14, 16 weeks ago because it takes time. It takes time. And the more that you do this in training, the more confident you're going to be. Every time you're running race pace, you could think about running down, if you're running Chicago, running down Michigan Ave. Or for me, I know there's certain parts of the course that I ran last year in a tune-up to CIM. So I'm going to start visualizing that. I'm going to visualize the vibe of running with the 3-hour pacer last year as I was trying to go for a sub 90 half, and they kept bumping into me. And it was like this ebb and flow. I've shared that story before. I'm not going to share it again today, but all the good vibes around it, right? Take time on your runs, on your training runs. Like those training runs give us time to think. So think about how you want to feel, how you want to get there, how you want to show up, and then journal about it and think about it and visualize it. Visualize how you want to look, your running form, how strong and smooth you want to look. I know Rick Rojas on episode 100, that was such a fun episode. He talked all about that, like the visualization of like, you could either take like a video of you running at the beginning of the season and then visualize how you want to change that for race day. Or you could also just visualize like running a very strong and smooth race pace with a great running form and how that looks, because that is all going to translate it. But you have to practice it. Even if it's a few minutes, it's going to pay off on race day. Okay, so the next thing is breathing. Oh, breathing is such a huge component to breakthrough performances, not just breathing when we're running. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the breathing that comes into play when you're going into a workout and you're feeling nervous, or you're feeling anxious, or you're feeling excited, because all of those feelings create a higher heart rate. And what we know to be true is that if you have a higher heart rate as you're running, it's not going to feel as relaxed and as smooth as you want it to feel. So I think breathing is a huge component going into some of those bigger runs where you are feeling some feels and your heart rate is elevated, to take a step back and close your eyes and take in 4 counts in and 4 counts out. Now that can be very deep breathing of a pretty big deep inhale to a very long exhale. And maybe that's 4 times in, 4 times out. The Navy SEALs do this as a method in their training, but it can bring down everything a notch or two. It can create an incredible amount of focus in a very short amount of time. You might be able to flow into, which is part of focus, but into the intention of what you're about to do. Right now, my Wednesday night crew is so great. And for anyone who has like a mile at marathon pace before we get into the workout, everyone's overrunning it because they're coming off of half marathon training and they're feeling good. They're feeling fit. And I'm like, focus on marathon pace, right? Like, can you run this for 26.2 miles? So if we take everything down a few notches, we really gain that focus. We gain that clarity. We gain that intention. We might be able to go into our workout with a stronger intention, a stronger focus, a stronger visualization of what we want to create. We might be able to dial in our running form a little bit more and really bask in all the glory of all the mobility work and all of that has done for us. And it all can kind of come together. So taking things down a notch, relaxing into pace is going to be a huge piece to develop in training, because how we show up in training is how we show up on race day. And it has to be practiced in training before we go to race day, or it's not going to translate, because everything is going to be heightened on race day. Every single sensation, every single thing, because it's race day. There's a lot that we have going on in our minds and in our bodies, a lot to focus on. And something that I've learned in the Coaches Collective is we could even start by taking that outside of training first. So maybe it's something, let's say you get anxious before a workout. And my suggestion is taking like closing your eyes, taking a few deep breaths in and out, or as many as you need to kind of gain that clarity and gain that focus. And if that seems like too much or not something that's going to resonate with you or have the capability of showing up in your training to do it, because, there's a lot going on, we might forget. Where can you place that in your life before you take it into training? So where else do you get anxious? Is it going into a meeting? Is it recording a podcast? No, I don't get anxious. Maybe a little nervous. Where else does it show up? Is it meeting someone new, going into a new setting? Sometimes I can feel anxious going into new group runs. I shared that with someone last week, that anytime I go to a group run, I think like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to know anyone. Who am I going to talk to? Am I just going to be like standing by myself, which kind of feels awkward? You know what I mean? You probably have had those same feelings. And what's interesting with that idea of how I build this up, and sometimes that's why I don't go to group runs, is that that is not true. That is simply not true. At this state of how I show up in the Boulder and Denver running community, like I'm always kind of like surprised at how many people know who I am, and just the natural way I can talk to people who don't know who I am and just like start making conversation while we wait for the run to start. So I think it's a really good example of like, if you can take it outside into your life, do something, take that breathing exercise into something that might give you anxiety, you're going to show to yourself and prove to yourself that you can do it. And it's probably going to reap some really cool thing in your life too, like reap the rewards of that. And then once you started getting into a good cadence with that in your life, you can then bring it into your training, and then you can take it into race day. But do you see like even that evolution could take months? It's not something that's going to change overnight. It probably isn't going to change overnight, but it can be something that if we start it early enough, we are giving ourselves a chance to prove ourselves right to do it. And then lastly, it's winning your week and have proper planning for your week. So I love this concept of like win your week, win your run. And it came from, I'm sure you've heard it before, and I haven't heard it in a really long time, but one of my friends mentioned it to me. She's a part-time run coach. She's an engineer. And we were on a hike with our dogs over the 4th of July weekend. And she was kind of sharing about like an athlete who was like disappointed that his long run wasn't a certain pace, right? So I bet we could all like say like, oh, wow, that sounds like me. And her feedback to him was like, but you kept your long run easy, which was the intention of today's plan. So you won your run. Like it doesn't matter that you didn't hit X pace, which was some arbitrary goal or expectation you had in your mind. You really did everything I asked you to do, which is the intentionality of this run, which is going to be the domino effect of the rest of your week, your training block that you're in, your training cycle, right? So I absolutely love this. And I think like if you can win your week in terms of not just your training runs, but winning your week in terms of proper planning, you're going to have that elevated performance in the fall. So, what I mean by that is like, I see a lot of athletes, and I fall into this too some weeks of like just going through the motions of training. Just like put the shoes on, start the watch, just do it, get it done. You're not really like paying attention to anything. And it just is what it is. I show up some days like this to the track, which is not great. Not great. I get called out on it very quickly. So showing up to like be prepared, be ready to go, be curious, notice what's happening, be intentional with the day, and lean into it and make it a big win, and treat it like a glass half full, like a training deposit has just been made because I just ran my easiest zone 2 run ever. Like, yes, that's what we want. I started in zone 1. I got to zone 2 by mile 2, and I just stayed low zone 2. It's my slowest run ever. That's huge. That's like a breakthrough, right? Create the time to get everything done that you want to get done, everything that you say you're going to get done. Those mobility sessions, the strength training. I food prepped last night and I felt like a rock star because that is a very difficult thing for me to do at this stage of where I'm at with Elevate and how I want to spend my time. But I also know that it is a huge needle mover for me when it comes to my training and actually how I show up during the week, because I don't want to be hangry. I typically have a lot of calls, a lot of meetings, a lot of things to do, and like trying to figure out what to eat isn't a good use of my time. And I could be using that for so many other things. So for me this week, it's like I get to be very intentional with my running because I'm running a lot this week. I need to food prep and get to food prep because I'm running so much this week. I also have a lot of meetings and a lot of calls and a lot of things going on. So I need to be prepared. So I'm fueled well. So I have good energy. My energy doesn't dip. I don't get the hanger pains, like all the things, right? And then I also think it's really cool if you can go into your week, you can be prepared, create time to get everything that you want to get done. Maybe it's like blocking off time in your calendar. I did that this week for the first time of like everything, um, like just planned out everything in time blocks. Yikes. I think it actually made me more anxious seeing it than I think what the intention of it is supposed to be. Um, but create the time. It could be planning out your calendar like that. Where are you going to get uncomfortable? What scares you? Lean in and be curious with that and just see what happens. Just notice without judgment. I'm a big believer that with like our runs, let's say you have workouts that aren't going well, or you have long runs, you have races, it's the rule of thirds with training, right? It's all data. And if we can kind of remove ourselves from the outcome and say, but it's just data, we're just gathering data to give us more information to create a stronger purpose later, that can kind of take away some of that anxiousness, right? It gives us more time to plan for that short and long-term goals too, or it gives us more data to be able to plan for the short and long-term goals. So win your week. Develop a system that works for you. And maybe winning your week is going to look different than how I want to win my week with like having 1 week of food prep. I'm like 1 week in. Hopefully I can string this together for like 16 more weeks. And like how I want to win my week, right? And then yours is going to look different, and your friends is going to be different, and your training partners week is probably going to look different. But think about all those things I mentioned. Be prepared, create the time. Do you want to get uncomfortable? What scares you? Lean in, be curious, just notice. Do all these things within that proper training of the week. If you have a whole repeat workout, set that time aside to make it happen. Make sure you're setting yourself up for success to be able to drive to get that run in. I did a very poor job of that last week. My schedule overran my life at the later part of the week. You don't want it to get to that point. You want to be able to say that you're dictating your week, you're setting the terms, you're leaving when you need to leave to get that hell workout in. And you're going to be stronger for it. It's going to create confidence. It's going to create breakthroughs. It's going to create heck yeah moments. And when we have all of those in training, along with all the other 4 things that I mentioned for today, it can only create a stronger runner. And what I know to be true about creating a stronger runner is that that runner is going to create new things and have breakthroughs and run PRs and crush process goals. And ultimately, at the end of all of this, at the end of your running career, whenever that is, that's kind of what you want to look back on, right? Of like, yeah, I worked so hard for this goal. I really showed up and I made things happen. When you can do that in training, maybe it's even looking back on the last training cycle, I guarantee you it's going to give you confidence to move forward in your life in that same way. And maybe you use these same tools in your job or with your significant other or with your family, and finding ways to do things differently but similar to training. So that's this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave reviews, rate, subscribe, do all the good stuff that you can do online. If you want to follow Elevate on Instagram, our handle is Elevate Your Running. My personal handle is Sarah, SAYRAH Runs Happy. Thank you so much for listening this week. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.